The scream tore through the night, raw and desperate, as if the world itself was breaking. I was born in that moment, slick with blood, my first breath stolen from my mother's last. By morning, the village whispered my name, Alara, the child who killed her mother. I grew up in the shadow of that truth, raised by Agnes, the midwife who delivered me. Her hands, rough from years of bringing life into the world, were my only comfort. She lived on the edge of our small coastal village, in a cottage that smelled of lavender and sea salt, where the wind howled secrets through the cracks. Agnes never spoke of my mother, Lila, except to say she was beautiful and fierce, with eyes like the ocean before a storm. I clung to those scraps, piecing together a woman I'd never know, while guilt gnawed at my heart like a tide eroding the shore. By 16, I was a girl of quiet defiance, my dark hair always tangled from running through the cliffs, my hands stained with ink from sketching the world I longed to understand. The village children taunted me, cursed child. They'd hiss, but Agnes taught me to hold my head high. You're no curse, she'd say, her voice firm as she kneaded dough or stitched a wound. You're Lila's legacy. But I saw the flicker in her eyes, the weight of something unsaid, and it drove me to search for answers she wouldn't give. One stormy evening, as thunder rattled the cottage, I found a locked box under Agnes's bed, hidden beneath a pile of quilts. My heart pounded as I pried it open, the rusted hinge groaning like a warning. Inside was a letter, its edges yellowed, addressed to me in a trembling hand. My mother's hand. The words blurred as my eyes stung. Alara, my light, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But know this, you were wanted. Fiercely wanted. I clutched the letter, my chest tight, as the storm outside roared louder. What else had been kept from me? That night, I didn't sleep. The letter spoke of a love so deep it hurt to read, but it also hinted at a secreted truth about my father, a man Agnes swore she didn't know. He left before you were born, she'd always said, her lips tight. But the letter suggested otherwise, mentioning a promise, a betrayal, and a name, Thomas. Who was he? Why had Agnes hidden this? I felt the ground shift beneath me, as if the life I'd known was a lie built on sand. The next morning, I confronted Agnes. Her face paled as I held up the letter, my voice shaking. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I swore to protect you, she whispered. Some truths are too heavy for a child. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was a young woman, burning with questions, and I vowed to uncover the rest of my mother's story, no matter the cost. Agnes began to speak, her voice low, as if afraid the walls might hear. She told me of Lila's courage, how she'd loved a man who promised her the world but vanished when she needed him most. Thomas, my father, was no ghost, was alive, somewhere, and Agnes knew more than she'd ever admitted. The letter was only the beginning, a thread I'd pull until the whole tapestry of my life unraveled. I didn't know then how far I'd go, or how the truth would break me before it set me free. The letter burned in my pocket as I stormed out of the cottage, the wind whipping my hair across my face. Agnes's voice echoed behind me, Alara, wait. But I couldn't stop. The village square blurred past, faces turning, whispers trailing me like shadows. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I headed for the cliffs, where the sea roared below, matching the chaos in my chest. The letter had mentioned a Placia cove where my mother and Thomas used to meet, hidden from prying eyes. I'd heard of it, a jagged slit in the rocks where lovers carved their names into the stone. If Thomas was real, if he'd loved her, maybe he'd left something there. My boots slipped on the wet path, but I pressed on, driven by a hunger I couldn't name. The cove was smaller than I'd imagined, a crescent of sand framed by towering cliffs. I searched the rocks, my fingers tracing weathered initials L+T, carved deep, surrounded by a heart. My throat tightened. This was real. They were real. But the carving was old, the edges smoothed by time. Had he ever come back? I sank to my knees, the letter trembling in my hands as I read it again. Thomas promised we'd build a life. But promises break. Alara, forgive him. If you can. Forgive him. I wanted to scream. He'd abandoned us. Back at the cottage, Agnes was waiting, her eyes red. You went to the cove, she said. Not a question. I nodded, my voice sharp. Why didn't you tell me about him? She sighed, pulling a shawl tight around her shoulders. Because knowing would have hurt you more. He's not the man you think. Her words were a knife, twisting. She told me Thomas was a sailor, charming and reckless, who swore he'd marry Lila, but sailed away when she told him about me. Agnes had seen the pain it caused, how Lila clung to hope until her final breath. I didn't want to believe her, but doubt crept in. Was my father a coward? A liar? I spent days scouring the village for anyone who remembered him. Old fishermen, their faces lined like maps, shook their heads. Thomas. Left years ago. Trouble. That one. But one woman, a baker with flour-dusted hands, paused. He came back once, she said quietly. After Lila died. Asked about you. My heart lurched. He'd come back. Why hadn't he stayed? That night, I dreamed of my mother. Her face vague, but her voice clear. Find him. Alara. Not for him, but for you. I woke with a fire in my chest. I'd track down Thomas, wherever he was, and demand the truth. Agnes tried to stop me, her voice breaking. Some doors are better left closed. But I was already gone. My bag packed, the letter folded against my heart. The world was bigger than this village, and I'd tear it apart to find the man who broke my mother. The port town of Harborside was a 3-day walk, the only place where ships from our village docked. I hitched rides with merchants, my heart pounding with every mile. The letter was my map, its words my compass. Thomas sailed for the city, chasing dreams bigger than us. Harborside was chaos-crowded docks, shouting vendors, the stench of fish and salt. I was a village girl, out of place, but I didn't care. I had a name and a purpose. I started at the taverns, where sailors gathered like gulls. Thomas, I'd say, describing the man from Agnes's reluctant stories, tall, dark-haired, with a scar above his brow. Most shrugged, but one old man, his fingers curled around a mug, squinted at me. You're Lila's girl, aren't you? My breath caught. He knew her. He pointed me to a shipyard, where a man named Thomas had worked years ago, fixing sails. Gone now, he said. Try the city. The city. It loomed in my mind, vast and unreachable, but I had no choice. I bartered my sketches for a seat on a cargo wagon, the road stretching endlessly before me. The driver, a kind-eyed woman, asked why I was running. I'm not running, I said. I'm chasing. She smiled, like she understood, and handed me an apple. I ate it slowly, watching the horizon, wondering if Thomas would even recognize me. The city was a beast sprawling, loud, alive with possibility and danger. I wandered its streets, clutching my mother's letter like a lifeline. I asked at every dock, every inn, until my voice grew hoarse. Days turned to weeks, and despair crept in. What if he was gone forever? Then, in a smoky tavern, a man overheard my questions. Thomas, with the scar, he said, leaning close. He's a foreman now, at the Eastern shipyard. My heart leapt, but his next words chilled me. Not a good man to cross. Girl. I found the shipyard at dawn, the air thick with sawdust and salt. There he was, older, weathered, but unmistakable, the scar glinting in the morning light. I froze, my voice gone. This was my father, the man who'd left us. I wanted to run to him, to scream, to demand why. Instead, I watched him bark orders, his face hard, nothing like the romantic figure in my mother's letter. Had she loved a lie? I followed him that night to a small house on the city's edge. A woman answered the door, her smile warm as she kissed him. My stomach twisted. He had a family, a life. Without me, I stood in the shadows, the letter crumpling in my fist. Tomorrow, I'd face him. Tomorrow, I'd make him see me. The next morning, I stood outside Thomas's house, my heart a drumbeat in my chest. The door opened, and there he was, his eyes narrowing as he saw me. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough. I held up the letter, my hand shaking. "I'm Alara, Lila's daughter." His face went white, like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't invite me in. We stood in the street, the city waking around us. As I poured out my stormy mother's death, the letter, the years of wondering. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Finally, he said, "I didn't know she died." A lie, I thought, remembering the baker's words. He'd come back. He'd known. "Why did you leave her?" I asked, my voice breaking. He looked away, the scar on his brow stark in the sunlight. I was young, scared. I couldn't stay. His words were a punch, stealing my breath. I wanted to hate him, but I saw the guilt in his eyes, the weight he carried. He told me he'd try to find us, years later, but the village had turned him away, calling him a coward. "I didn't know about you," he said. I didn't believe him, but I wanted to, desperately. His wife, Clara, appeared at the door, her face kind but wary. She invited me in, her hands gentle as she offered tea. I sat, the letter on the table, as Thomas told me fragments of his life as sailor who settled down, a man who'd run from his past. Clara listened, her eyes soft, and I wondered what she saw in him. "You look like her," she said quietly, and my heart ached. I stayed for hours, piecing together their story. Thomas had loved my mother, in his way, but fear had won. He'd built a new life, with Clara and a son I hadn't known about, a boy my age. Away at school, I felt like an intruder, a reminder of a past he'd buried. But Clara's kindness kept me there, her questions about my life pulling me open. I told her about Agnes, the village, the cove. She listened like it mattered. That night, I lay awake in a borrowed bed, the letter under my pillow. Thomas wasn't the villain I'd imagined, but he wasn't a hero either. He was just a man, flawed and human. I didn't know if I could forgive him, but I wanted to understand him. For my mother, for me. Days turned to weeks in the city, and I stayed with Thomas and Clara, caught between anger and a strange, fragile hope. Thomas was distant, his words clipped, but Clara drew me in, her warmth a balm to my raw edges. She showed me old sketches she'd kept, drawings Thomas had made of my mother Lila laughing, her hair wild in the wind. He loved her, Clara said, her voice steady, but he wasn't ready for her strength. I spent my days exploring the city, sketching its chaos, but my nights were for the letter. I read it until the words were part of me. Alara, live boldly, like I couldn't. I wanted to, but the weight of Thomas's presence held me back. One evening, he found me in the garden, my sketchbook open. "You draw like her," he said, his voice soft for once. I snapped the book shut. "You don't get to know me yet," I said, and he flinched. Clara urged me to give him time, but time was a luxury I didn't feel I had. I needed to know why my mother had written forgive him. What had she seen in him? I started asking questions about their love, their fights, the promises he broke. Thomas's answers were halting, but they came. He spoke of Lila's fire, how she'd dreamed of a life beyond the village, how he'd panicked when she told him about me. I wasn't enough for her, he admitted, and I saw the boy he'd been, scared and small. One day, Clara handed me a box of my mother's things letters, trinkets, a necklace with a tiny shell pendant. "He kept these," she said, "even after all these years." I held the necklace, its weight grounding me. My mother had worn this, loved this. I slipped it on, feeling her closer than ever. But the box held another surprising second letter, addressed to Thomas. If you find her, tell her I loved her enough to let you go. My eyes burned. She'd known he wouldn't stay. I confronted Thomas that night, the letter in my hand. She let you go? I said, my voice shaking. Why didn't you fight for her? He looked broken, his hands clasped tight. I thought I was saving her. He whispered. I was wrong. For the first time, I saw him not as my father, but as a man who'd failed and lived with it every day. Forgiveness felt closer, but not yet mine to give. I decided to return to the village, to Agnes, to the place where my mother's story began and ended. Thomas offered to come, but I shook my head. Not yet, I said. I needed to face this alone, to understand what the letters meant in the place where they were written. Clara hugged me, slipping a sketchbook into my bag. For your mother, she said. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. The journey back was quieter, my heart heavier but clearer. The village looked smaller, the cliffs less daunting. Agnes was waiting, her eyes searching mine as I stepped into the cottage. You found him, she said. I nodded, handing her the second letter. She read it in silence, tears falling onto the page. She loved you so much, she whispered. She wanted you to have everything. We sat by the fire, and Agnes told me the rest, how Lila had begged her to raise me, to keep me safe from the pain of Thomas's absence. I hid the letters because I thought they'd break you, she said. I took her hand, my voice soft. They didn't. They made me whole. Agnes smiled, the first real smile I'd seen in years. I spent days revisiting the cove, sketching the initials, the waves, the sky. The necklace hung around my neck, a piece of my mother I could carry. I wrote to Thomas, not forgiving him, not yet, but asking him to write back, to tell me about his life, his son, the man he was now. I wanted to know him, not the myth I'd built, but the truth. One evening, as the sun set over the cliffs, I felt Hermie mother, Lila, in the wind, in the roar of the sea. Her letter had changed me, not because it gave me answers, but because it gave me her voice. She'd loved me, fiercely, and that was enough. I wasn't a curse. I was her light. Months passed, and Thomas's letters began to arrive, halting at first, then longer, filled with stories of his life, his regrets, his son, James. I read them by the cove, the necklace warm against my skin. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was a start. I wrote back, sharing my sketches, my dreams, the way the village felt alive now. Not a cage, but a home. Agnes watched me grow, her pride quiet but fierce. You're her daughter, she'd say, and I'd smile, knowing it was true. I started teaching the village children to draw, their laughter filling the holes in my heart. The whispers of cursed child faded, replaced by respect, even love. I was Alara, not just Lila's daughter, but my own person. One day, Thomas arrived, unannounced, his face nervous as he stood at the cottage door. James was with him, a boy with my mother's eyes, shy but curious. We walked to the cove together, the three of us, and I showed them the initials, told them about Lila. Thomas cried, his shoulders shaking, and James took my hand. I'm glad you're my sister, he said. I couldn't speak, but I squeezed his hand back. That night, we sat with Agnes, the fire crackling, and I felt something new. Family. Not perfect, but real. The letters had led me here, to a truth that didn't erase the pain but made it bearable. My mother's love had carried me through, and now, I carried it forward. I wasn't defined by her death, but by her life, her courage, her light. As I looked at Thomas, James, and Agnes, I knew the journey wasn't over. Forgiveness would come, slowly, like waves smoothing stone. But I was ready to live boldly, as my mother had wanted, with a heart open to love, to pain, to everything that made me human.